Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah, and with my colleague Paola, we will be your moderators this evening from Westminster Libraries. Joining me is historian and director of Handheld Press, Kate Macdonald, and our guest speaker, Kate Slotover of the Book Club Review podcast.
Thank you very much. Right, well, welcome everybody. I'm Kate Macdonald. I run Handheld Press and I'm a literary historian, and I have been a member of book clubs in my time. And today we have Kate Slotover of the Book Club Review podcast.
Very nice to be here.
Good. Can you tell us what the Book Club Review podcast is? Is it pretty much what it says on the tin?
We describe it as the podcast about book clubs and the books that get people talking. So we are particularly interested in those books that have that book club X factor, whether that's a book that's particularly divisive or a book that everybody loved, but maybe it's got some kind of flaw and that's really interesting to discuss, or a book which is packed with ideas and there's lots to talk about. And we were both in book clubs of our own, Laura and I, and we just found we wanted to keep that conversation going, and so we started the podcast as a way of doing that. And that is the sort of ethos behind it. It's that spirit of discussion and debate about books that we really love.
So it sounds like a really good resource if you're looking for books to choose for your book club.
Thinking about the best book club books, the can't fail books, which I know we're going to come on to later. I did actually have a really lovely time this morning just browsing back through our archive, because we've been going for 6 years and we've been doing a podcast every other week. And so that's a lot of book club books.
It is, yeah.
And so, I feel like I do actually have some expertise in this area of choosing book club books.
Yeah, and in-depth knowledge of the last 6 years of publishing too.
Exactly.
Well, so you are already in a book club. How are you in more than one, or just the one?
Right now, I'm in 2. I'm in my own one, which is the one that has been going since the early days when Laura's in it, and that's just carried on. And what we do with the show is that we talk about the books that our book clubs have read. We each read the book and then we weave in the feedback from the group, and we also have our own opinions. And so hopefully what you get within each episode is a really nice kind of well-rounded discussion of that book with lots of different voices being heard. But I'm also now, recently we launched a podcast book club, which we're doing through Patreon. So yeah, some paying subscribers join me once a month, and we read and discuss things very much in the sort of same format that I'm used to. But what's interesting about that is that for the podcast book club, I am very much responsible at the moment. It may evolve, but at the moment it's me that chooses the books. And so it has really then got me thinking quite hard about this. I really want to choose books that I think are going to be, going to deliver, really nice sort of good read, interesting debate, good discussion. That's what you want. So I've been thinking about that a lot for my own choices.
I'm not in a book club at the moment, mainly because I publish books, so I find it really hard to be in a book club. I did run a book club in Bath, where I live, which was based on Handheld Press books. And that was really good. People paid £2 to come to help for the hire of the room and the bookshop. But it gradually dwindled until the very last meeting, one other person came. So that wasn't such a good idea. And then before that, I was doing a book club in Brussels, where I lived, which was based on my teaching as an English lecturer. And again, I was choosing the text and people paid to join. And it turned into an ad hoc seminar, which I really enjoyed. And people stuck the course. They wanted to study literature in a very informal but quite structured way. And at least one school age girl, she went on and passed her exams for her IB, her international bac, with flying colors, because the course, such as it was, the club, had given her the confidence about how to talk about books in normal company rather than regurgitating what the teacher has told you. But before that, I've only been a member of one book club in which we were all equal. And that was a very Anglo-Belgian group, 2 Americans, 2 Brits, one of whom was Indian Brit, and a Belgian lady. So I was in that for about 3 years. And that was very international, quite different from anything I would find in Britain, I think.
Well, I think it's interesting, the idea of what do you want your book club to be? You've just described 3 quite different book clubs there. There's one which almost for me falls into the sort of perhaps more social category,
Yeah.
where you want to meet up with sort of friendly, like-minded people. Maybe they're friends, maybe they're just people you know. My book club actually are not from my primary friendship group. Most of them are friends of friends or people who've come along. And so for me, it's been a really lovely way to kind of meet this group of people that I don't know that well.
Yeah.
But then there's also, I think, the idea that sometimes book club can be a really fantastic way of tackling things that you maybe wouldn't tackle left to your own devices. We interviewed a wonderful lady called Toby Brothers for the podcast, who runs a London literary salon. And the whole kind of idea and remit behind that, it's very much, as you were saying, it is the idea of it. It's a sort of, it's to help people get through texts like Ulysses, like Proust, Finnegan's Wake. I think there's some ridiculous thing, like she's got one group who are now reading Finnegan's Wake for the 4th time because they all love it so much, because they clearly get so much out of these sessions. And I went to one, and it is a real deep dive, and she does have a lot of expertise which she's bringing to that. But if like me, say, you know, you've not really got around to tackling something like that on your own, and you think, well, actually, you know, this is something this is like a stone I'd really like to turn over. You know, something like that, a book club and a group of people who are all there, you know, doing it with you, I think can be a wonderful way of reading. And
I find myself thinking I know far too much about teaching literature to be able to do that. And I know far too much about publishing to be able to be rational about how they did the cover and look at the marketing campaign. And I think that's what stopped me joining a proper book club. I've impeded my own joiningness. So I think there are many ways that book clubs are in many shapes and forms. So you can have meeting monthly, fortnightly, or even weekly. Which do you think is the best frequency for meeting up?
Oh gosh, I mean, I can't imagine meeting more than monthly. And my book club, in fact, my own personal book club, we tend to fall in at around every 6 weeks. But again, that just depends on where your group are in their sort of stage of life, if they've got more time or less time. My group are in that busy phase where they've all got careers and they've got families and they're juggling lots of things. And for us, it's you know, any more frequent I think the reading would start to feel a burden. People would struggle to fit it in.
Yeah, it would be more like
whereas if you've got a group of people who are perhaps maybe recently retired, or you know, they've got more time on their hands. I mean, I love the idea of more, you know, get-togethers and more chat. Don't get me wrong. I think that'd be great. It's just about making sure that you're balancing time so that people can read the books and not feel overloaded. And I think also allowing for the fact that, you know, readers are going to have their own personal reading that they want to do. You know, they're not always going to want to read the book that's been chosen for them. And so to make sure that, you know, everyone has time to do that as well.
Yeah. Too often I hear when my mother was in a book club, she was constantly complaining because, oh God, I've got to read this book. I really don't want to. And this brings me on to the next point, is how do you choose the books? Her group was the kind of group that scheduled a book for every month in the year. So they knew what they had to read. And they would circulate copies. So it wasn't, you know, people would get library copies out and read them quickly. But there was very little choice. It wasn't particularly democratic. Each person chose a book. So you had no choice except for your own book. Whereas in many other book groups, they make a democratic choice and the collective choice is the one everybody wants to read. So my poor mother, burdened with having to read things she really hated and struggled to get even halfway into, it really put her off book clubs because she felt she'd made that commitment.
You've got to find the right book club for you. And I think I would hopefully your mother sort of saw the writing on the wall with that one and maybe found a more one that was more aligned with what she wanted, because it's a lot of time, isn't it? You know, it's not like going to the cinema and watching a film, which you can do in 3 hours and then you can come back and have an opinion about it. You know, anything you read is going to take time and commitment.
And it's going to clog up your personal reading. It's going to be
exactly there. And so, you know, much as I love a nudge to read something that I wouldn't normally read, I mean, that's one of the things that I really love about book club, is the way it will get me to read things that I personally wouldn't necessarily pick up left to my own devices. At the same time, if you're constantly being pushed to read things that really aren't for you, that's just going to be really dispiriting. So
yeah,
I think it's about finding that right balance and perhaps, testing out a group. If you're in a group and you feel like actually that's happening more often than not, think about starting your own group, and figure out. I also think that one of the great pleasures of book club, I think for me, is in choosing the books. There is this delicious moment where you're going to be kicking ideas around. You're going to be people chipping in with things that they thought maybe would be good. I think for me, that's a big part of it. And I think then it's thinking about, okay, well, how can you incorporate that into the process? With my book club, it happens very organically at the end of every session. Last 10 minutes or so, we'll have a nice chat about what do we think we want to read next.
Yeah. People
will make suggestions, and generally speaking, we'll be quite happy to sort of pick one and vote based on that. But I was interested in Laura, my podcast partner, her mum. Her book club has a great system, I think, where twice a year they get together for a lovely lunch or dinner, I think, and they plan out the next 6 months worth of reading, much like your mother's book club. But with this, everyone has a say, and they have this lovely time sort of debating all the choices, and then they pick their books.
It just sounds lovely.
Doesn't that sound nice?
Yeah, I mean,
that wouldn't, for me, practically in terms of time, that wouldn't work. But I love the idea. And then Phil, frequent, very much loved regular guest on our podcast, who lives in New York. He moved there recently from London, and when he got there, he joined a book club. And he sent me and Laura on our WhatsApp chat a sample of how they choose their books. And it's run by someone who goes through this incredibly exhaustive process of selecting choices. And then there's a very complicated voting process where they will go through rounds. And then at the end, finally, they'll get something. We're falling about. Like, it's just the idea that we would ever have this much time to kind of prep. But at the same time, I kind of love that. I kind of love that, someone wanted to put that much thought into it. It's going to be good, surely, at the end of all that.
There could well be a history of extreme dispute. So if you've got set rules, we're going to treat it like a tennis tournament, then nobody can get huffy about it.
It's true. We don't know the backstory there, do we? There could be a reason for that.
And you mentioned that your book club is not your primary friendship group, but friends of friends and people who've just emerged in. So it's not so much a random group of strangers, but it's a group of people who have a connection to you, even if it's tentative. Have you ever been in a book club when everybody already has the same background, like from a work context, or you're already in an association or a club and you decide to have a book club as part of that?
I haven't done that. No, I think the only sort of thing I've done is occasionally I've been to book clubs run by bookshops. Which is a slightly different thing. But no, I've never really done anything where it was sort of people I really didn't know and it was professional. My office don't have a book club, and I haven't been there very long. I've got a new job, but I'm actually kind of eyeing them up. I'm thinking, does this work environment need a book club? I think it does.
It would be something. Yeah. I've been in one where there was a WI book club, so particularly large WI group was big enough to have its own spin-off mini groups, and there was a book club, and it's extremely effective and active. I just don't want to read any of the books, so I quietly drifted away because the taste of that demographic really didn't appeal to me. So where do you get your recommendations from? How do you find the books and make you think, oh, I want to read that?
Well, I think that is key. I think there are lots of books in the world, as you well know, and it's just impossible that we could ever read them all. It's actually quite hard even to know about them all. That in itself is quite a challenge.
Yeah.
And so you've got to keep your ear to the ground. You really do. You have to just be reading about books, listening to things about books. When you're in a bookshop, talk to the bookseller. They're going to love that. But, winkle out, like, what are the books people are talking about? What are the books people buying? What are the books people are discussing? I obviously make a podcast and I spend a lot of time editing. And so actually I get relatively little listening time, but there are podcasts that I do make time for. I love the New York Times book podcast, which went through a phase of not being very good, and then recently I feel it's got good again.
Oh, was it restarted? I recommend that because I stopped but okay, I'll restart that one.
What else I was going to suggest? Obviously the BBC, a good read, which people will laugh because this feels like such an obvious thing, but it took me a long time to discover a good read. And that's because when you listen to it as a podcast, it's buried within the feed that's called Books and Authors. Now, I enjoy listening to an author interview, but actually, generally speaking, I don't, for me, kind of waste time on those. I want to hear people talking about books. I'm less interested in hearing someone interviewing an author. But then within Books and Authors, that is where you find a good read, which is, I think, sort of monthly. And that really is, they will have 2 authors on, but they will be there to discuss a book that is not their own. And there will be this lovely exchange of views about it. And often they will flag up other things in the process. And I have loved the way that has flagged up some things to me, maybe even sometimes things that I knew about, but I hadn't really considered, that it's got me to think about in a new way. And maybe I should go back to that. So I love it for that. There's a lovely podcast called The Mooksy and the Gripes.
I've seen the title, but I've never listened to it. What's it like?
It took me a long time to stumble across it, because there's unless something has the word books in the title, the algorithm is not necessarily going to show it to you. But what it is just these 2 men who are American. I'm not even quite sure where they live. They've got families, they've got jobs, but they are also fantastic readers, and they love to just get together and talk about what they've been reading. A very nice thing, which I always feel we should try and do more of on my show, and often we get so caught up in the conversation we forget to do it. But what they do is that they actually will take a little bit of time and they will read a bit from the book that they're talking about. And I love that. It's really nice just to get that little taster. So that was a very sort of unexpected delight, really. And also
you get a feed of American fiction or American books, which you might miss otherwise.
Yes, although they are wonderfully eclectic and will read books from sort of all around the world. So what's brilliant is that you start to get a bit of a sense of, you can listen to one episode, but you're going to hear about 7, 8 or 9 books in that show, and from people who sort of are evaluating them to a degree, which is just really helpful. I mean, Laura and I try to do that as well. We do, when we're not doing book club shows, we do one called Bookshelf, where we will just go through the books that we've been reading recently. And that's what we have in mind too. It's like, well, what was great? What stuck with us? What do we think? Okay, I read it, but I'm going to move on. And so you hopefully will get a little taster of that. Backlisted, obviously, very, very famous now, but that's nice, because there was, when they first started, it wasn't. And it's so charming. Again, enormous breadth of literary kind of taste and experience that they have behind them, that they then bring to the book that they're discussing. And often whoever they'll having on is also usually very interesting and well read. So you sort of get lots of side recommendations for books through that show. I mean, there's so much out there. The other thing I love and want to recommend, so we have Instagram, an Instagram account, but because it's for the podcast, I only follow people who are posting about books or writing about books. And I was thinking, actually, people could do this, set up a separate Instagram account. It's so easy to do, and make that your Bookstagram account and follow people who are book people, because what you get and what I have, and when people grumble about social media, I'm always like, well, but why? Mainly my Instagram account is this lovely feed of people just talking about books, and it's also, I would say, it's like such a lovely corner of the internet.
It is.
We've been doing the podcast and Instagram for about 6 years, and in all that time I have never encountered any negativity, hostility, it just doesn't seem to happen in Bookstagram land, which is so great.
I think you're right.
Then you do come across these gems, there's certain accounts which will lead you to things. And I wanted to flag up Anne Patchett, the author, who is also famously a bookshop owner. And you can follow Parnassus Books on Instagram. It's at Parnassus Books. And every Friday she does a little Anne Patchett recommends to camera, and she just stands in the bookstore and she talks to camera. They're about 4 minutes long. She's unbelievable. She almost never says or anything like that. She's just amazing. And what she will do is she will tell you about something that she has come across that she loves. And they are such wonderful recommendations, whether it's something I know about that I'm interested to hear her take on it, or it's something completely new to me. She just recommended a book by an Irish author called Niall Williams. It was called, is it This Is Happiness, I think was the book. I had never heard of it. It sounded wonderful. And it wasn't just her recommendation. She was telling me basically about all the other people who had recommended it to her. So, you know, then that really makes it interesting to me. And I think, okay, so suddenly that's something that I've bumped up.
Yeah. Following bookshops on Instagram and social media is a good way to do it as well.
Absolutely.
Because obviously they get the new stuff, but also unexpected things. And actually, I really like alluring adverts. I mean, the huge amount of marketing money that publishers spend on adverts is not wasted on me, because I really like looking at them.
You mean on the tube?
Well, I don't live in London, but social media, and also in where else would I see them? In magazines, perhaps.
Right.
But I guess mainly it's social media, because it just pops up. And also hearing authors speak on a podcast or an interview. If I know more about what the author is talking about and what they're thinking, I become more interested in the books they've written. So Richard Osman, who is a massive name, he has published quite a few extremely well-selling books. I was being very snooty about it, going, Richard Osman, I don't read modern crime. My daughter now likes him, which I'm horrified by, because she's a hardcore horror goth. And then I heard him on Backlisted, and I thought, okay, you make a lot of sense. Maybe I will try one of your books. So I was persuaded, because the personality of the man overcame all my prejudices.
Well, and often, you know, writers, I feel like surely it goes hand in hand, but they're also great readers.
Yeah.
And they've spent their whole lives thinking hard about books. I love an author recommendation. And it is really interesting listening to an author talk about their work. I find it's almost, I have a slightly protective, I really love just being able to read something and have my own reaction to it and my own thoughts about it. After I've read something, then I do, especially if it's something I was really interested in, I do then like to go and look up and see if I can find a talk or something. And hear from them direct, but I like to do it that way around. So I tend not to listen to things that are just authors talking about their latest book, because I'd rather read it and find out myself.
In this case, he was talking about Nevil Shute, so it's a sideways glimpse of the man. So, great and catastrophic book club reads. I would say that books that everybody loves are a catastrophic book club read, because you've got nothing to talk about. Just like when you're marking a student essay, if the student essay is going to get 95%, that marking is done really quickly, because nothing to say, tick, tick, tick. But an essay or a book that's really bad, there is so much to unpick and to say, this is wrong and this is why and this is bad, and oh god, look, you've missed this bit. So yeah, picking a book that everybody loves, that makes me feel, oh no, we've got 50 minutes left, what are we going to do?
I think if it's rich enough, you know, we shouldn't like rule out things that, you know, because normally people really love things because they're excellent, you know. The sweet spot is you want a book that has got richness, it's got depth, it's got layers, so that even if you are in that situation where everyone was just like, this is just incredible, you're going to have a nice time sort of unpicking, well what did we love, and you know, what did you think about this? And you need something that's got almost, it needs to be something that's got that richness, which is why I think, you know, for example, I've been thinking a lot about comfort reading recently, you know, just books that we want to just curl up with. I read the Booker shortlist, which I'm not sure how closely you followed it, but it was 6 you know, very fine books, but each in its own way quite depressing, and I had read them in succession, so I was just at the end of these 6 books. I really was at a point where I just about wanted to just curl into a ball, hide under the bed. And so I prescribed myself some comfort reads. But I was thinking about the fact that, you know, sometimes a book like that, which maybe is really cozy, it's not too demanding, it's just something that you're going to lightly fly through, but actually that isn't going to be so good for book club, because it doesn't have the same kind of depth and richness that ideally would make for a good book club discussion.
Yeah, you wouldn't put an Agatha Christie in a book club. not at all. Unless it's for people who are learning English as a second language, when Agatha Christie would be a really good choice, because it'll get them to practice their language and be able to read it and be able to talk about it. That would be a good exercise.
I did just read an excellent biography of Agatha Christie by
Lucy Worsley. Yeah.
That I did think would make a good book club book. I mean, it depends as well. Like, is your book club going to do just fiction, or are you widening the net? My book club, we will read anything and everything.
Yeah, I wasn't so sure about that biography. Anyway, that's a separate conversation. Yeah, there's also the point
on that subject, just to say, what really drove me wild as someone who hasn't read Agatha Christie, I was not an Agatha Christie reader, and so, you know, her books she kept spoiling the plots, and I thought that was outrageous.
It's just let's just a separate conversation. But that does bring me to the point: does a book club allow science fiction and fantasy? Because for me, that's always been a deal breaker. You come across book groups, several that I've known about as well as some I've been part of. They simply won't read fiction that's fantastical, speculative science fiction, got elves or goblins in it. And for me, that's, what a shame, because that is actually my favorite reading. I'm happy to read lots of other things, but why are you not going to involve yourself with the fantastical? Because fantasy writing has huge amounts to say to us.
Yeah, I think, again, it comes back to when you're joining a book club or when you're building a book club, you know, setting those parameters. You know, so maybe then someone coming in, you would know, and you wouldn't then be sort of, you know, dismayed or defeated by the fact that people won't ever choose those. Some of the finest books we've ever done. We did The Left Hand of Darkness.
Yes,
fantastic book club. And we did there's an author called Ted Chang, who wrote a wonderful collection of sci-fi stories. But that was, I almost was thinking about 3 books that can't fail book club books. That was on my shortlist because it's such a fantastic, surprising, unexpected, beautifully written collection, and it was so rich. There was so much to talk about. I think we could have easily met for a second session, just do one
story from the
or
collection.
do one story.
It is a
they're wonderful
collection. Books that everybody hates. Have you ever come across that, when everybody in the group has said, nope, didn't like this, and this is why?
I mean, it's the wonder and joy of reading is that every single book is going to land differently with the person who reads it. You know, we human beings are not the same. Why should we expect that we're all going to think the same when we read something? Obviously, everyone is bringing their own, you know, kind of experience and sensibility to it. And so I don't think I've ever had a book where everybody was of the same opinion. You know, this is just terrible. We did have a very funny discussion about a book called The Finkler Question.
I was just about to say, that was we all hate it.
Isn't that funny? But it won the Booker Prize.
And that's why we chose
Booker Prize.
Yeah, never again.
We just thought, I mean, I think as well, it's like, well, when you're criticizing a book, you know, again, I think about this a lot, you know, in what ways is it okay to kind of like pull a book apart, and what ways maybe is it not really fair? You know, there's a kind of point where it starts to feel a bit mean-spirited, and I would never want to do that. You know, I do have such enormous respect for anyone who could write a book. I couldn't write a book. I wouldn't even know where to begin. So, you know, to me, it is this sort of magic, you know, people write these things. But at the same time, you know, when you've purchased the book and it's become your book, I think there's something about that kind of slight transactional nature there that then means that it sort of feels like you have a right to have an opinion on it.
Yeah.
The disconnect there between, the fact that it had won this incredibly prestigious literary prize and our experience of reading it. And I think we just found, for example, I think the main thing was just that what it seemed like was supposedly a very humorous sort of tone and thread running through it
We couldn't find that
felt
humor.
utterly flat, and we really would. But it's a bit of a shame, I think, when a book like that comes along. I think we were just so baffled.
Yeah.
We
And
felt obviously, you know, I think it felt like it's sort of the old days of the Booker, where I think they really felt like it was time, and they wanted to give him some, you know, the prize. So they did for that one.
It put that group off looking at Booker Prize winners ever again. We just thought, nope, let's just not do that. Go to our tastes. I also did not like Ben Okri's the Famished Road, which I thought was about 50% too long. It just went on, and I was really wanting to like it, and then
that's how I feel about Remains of the Day, which I think of as the book with the boring butler.
Yeah, I know.
Although I love, you know, the other stories I read, but yeah, Remains of the Day just didn't do it for me. I was thinking about, there was a book we did called The Hummingbird by Italian author called Sandra Veronesi, that has been an international bestseller, sort of done really well. Thought, oh, great! It's going to be so lovely reading this this book. And I really, I mean, hate is too strong a word, but I just
could not.
It didn't work. It didn't work for me. You know, sometimes the trouble is when you don't get on with a book, you kind of, for a book to work, you have to sort of believe in the magic of it, don't you? You have to sort of buy into the scenario the author's creating for you. And when you don't get on with a book, it's like you see through that. Yeah. And the trouble is you can't enjoy it then, because it just feels like hard work. And I just
suspend disbelief. Yes.
Really didn't like this main character. But my book club didn't agree, or they didn't feel as strongly as I did. And so actually it did make for a really good book club episode. I think it's a really good podcast episode, because of course you get a bit of that debate and Phil trying to convince me of its merits.
On my own blogging website, I have a series of collections of mini reviews, which are called things like To the Recycling or Another Pile for the Dustbin, which I just go through the books I've read recently, which are just bad. And these are the most popular posts I post, and they get so many views compared to the ones in which I'm positive and friendly about books that I've admired.
Well, so it's an interesting question then. Why are people so interested in what we think are, you know, why is that so interesting when you think?
I don't know. Is it confirmation of one's own prejudices, or am I right to feel so bad about this, or should I be feeling guilty for not liking that book? Sometimes it's reassuring to feel that other people also think a book is terrible. Like the Essex Serpent, I think, is just an appalling novel.
Oh, Laura would love discussing it. She feels the same way. Whereas there were things, I saw its flaws, but there were things in that book I really enjoyed. So for me, I was happy to go with it. But that was also a very funny discussion book.
So much wrong with it, or so much it could be right.
Some of, you know, that personal reaction and that. But I think the thing is to being open to those debates. You know, we always say, like, did you love it? Did you loathe it? That's great, because what we're really interested in is the discussion, and book clubs are so brilliant for that, because you know, it's a sort of space where you're saying that's okay. It's going to be brilliant. You actually want people to come with different opinions. That's really helpful. As you said, it's pretty boring if everyone just thinks something is great.
Indeed. Yeah. So and it's also good to be able to explain why something doesn't work.
Crucially, I think that's the thing. And I think, you know, I think that is really important. You have to be able to back it up. You're saying, well, this didn't work, you know, but why? And that then is quite fun, because you sort of you know, if you're reading something and you're really just like, oh, this is so terrible, start relishing instead the challenge of, like, you know, jotting down all the points that you know will then convince people of why you think it's bad, because that's going to be a lot of fun.
It will.
Yes.
So let's go on to our top 3 can't fail book club choices.
Okay.
What have you chosen?
So I couldn't, of course, when it came to it, find these books. We moved house recently and all my books are in boxes, but so I've just printed out the cover. My first book, going to be back to front anyway on the Zoom, but this is
it's fine.
By Lauren Groff. This was quite a bit of a sort of hit book when it was published. It did very, very well. But I thought, you know what, if people haven't read it, it's such a brilliantly self-contained read that takes you back in time. It's set in the medieval period, 12th century. Now, I picked this just thinking, hand on heart, what would be a really great book? And then I remembered that I was going to be speaking to a historian, and I suddenly felt a bit on the back foot about the things I'm about to assert about the plot and the historical setting.
Right.
But it's the main character is based on Marie de France, who was a real person.
Yeah.
Who we know about from this poetry that has come down to us from the 12th century, this French poetry that was, I believe, part of the formative tradition of French lays, are they called?
Yeah,
this style of poetry.
Part of the courtly romance, yeah.
So we have the poems, and we know this. You have to infer from the fact that these poems exist and what they're about, something about her life, which is all we know. There's virtually nothing is known about her. Lauren Groff took this idea of this character and set herself the task of, well, what was her life? What happened to her? And in a way, because there's no historical record and you just have these poems, she was really free to be thoroughly kind of inventive in a really delightful way. And so the young Marie de France, her parents die, and we learn quite early on that she is very resilient. She's very resourceful. I think she's 9 when this happens. And for 2 years, she secretly runs her father's estate because she knows that as soon as it's known that he is no longer alive, she'll be taken away, as indeed does happen. But very early on, you learn this is no ordinary child. And she's then taken into the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Yeah.
So there's a kinship there, it's distant relationship. And but she doesn't really fit there. And Eleanor initially, I think, is sort of intrigued by her, but after a while tires of her and wants her out of the way. And so she dispatches her to England, where she is going to be the prioress of this abbey. And so she gets that right, an abbey? Yes.
Yeah.
She gets to the abbey, and when she gets there, it is just awful. The nuns are starving, it's freezing, everyone is miserable and hates everybody else. It's just dreadful. And she's just like, oh my goodness, this is where I'm going to spend the rest of my life. And then that kind of resilience and resourcefulness kicks in, and you then have this delightful arc of like, well, how does she sort this place out?
Lovely. Oh, that sounds perfect.
What's brilliant about this book is you sort of think this is going to be the story. You think it's going to be, story of girl down on luck, makes good. It is that story, and it's very pleasing, that arc of the story, but that's really only half of it. And then you get, well, what did she do next? What happened next? And it's a really good page-turning story with characters you really love. It's written in a really interesting way. The structure of it is very interesting, where Groff said that she wanted to move away from what she sees as a very masculine, linear narrative. And she wanted to write something that was feminine, and what she felt was so perhaps the idea more of ripples rather than this sort of, going to a peak and then a climax.
Yeah.
And then so there's this really interesting structure to it that is then echoed in the imagery of the environments that she's in. And you get this rip-roaring story, you get all these fantastic relationships, and at the end you shut the back cover, you think, and then you realize there was not a single man in it.
Oh,
not a single one.
Absolutely
you
wonderful.
you don't even really notice
it
till you get to the end.
So clever.
I actually don't know if everybody will love it, but I think everyone will have something to say about it. I am
absolutely going to get that book. That sounds fabulous. Okay, so
I think discussion is guaranteed.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much to it. Well, what's your next one?
My next one is Free by Leah Ippey. So this is a memoir of Ippey's childhood growing up in Albania under communism. She is now, present day, she is a professor of economics professor at the London School of Economics. But this is her memoir of her childhood growing up in Albania and experiencing then communism, socialism, as it was, communism,
yeah.
It's at the end of the afternoon. Yeah, experiencing communism and being raised with a set of beliefs that gradually she starts to understand are not, in fact, the reality. And then comes the fall of the Iron Curtain, the opening up of Albania to the West. And she then experiences what happened next, where capitalism comes in, the old sort of structure and order is completely changed, and it's now sort of free market capitalism, I suppose, and what that did to the society that she was in. She is wonderful about the story of her family, her parents, her mother, who is extraordinarily sort of dogged in trying to recover the property that had been taken away from her family, that they had lost. And her father, we learn that, or she learns in the course of this book, that her great-grandfather was in fact Prime Minister of Albania pre the kind of then the sort of regime coming in. Yeah, exactly. And so as a result of that, her family effectively had been sort of blacklisted, and that's why her parents were never able to advance into sort of better jobs, and things were always very difficult for them, and life was always fairly precarious for them, because she didn't know any of this at the time. And so it's this extraordinary story of someone gradually coming to understand these things, and then living through difficult times as Albania then kind of sort of descended into sort of civil war, really. And then finally, the story of how she came to end up being in London and where she is today. You would not think that a memoir of someone's life growing up in Albania would be as riveting, as page-turning, as heartwarming, as it's laced through with humor. She is wonderful at the way she observes the world, and she really does succeed in showing you things from the child's point of view, the child that she was, with the knowledge that she had. And yet at the same time, we as readers know something of what was really going on. And so there is this wonderful kind of tension and disconnect, which gradually, of course, then becomes she starts to know what we know. That's beautifully handled. She's not a literary writer, but the writing is absolutely beautiful. She's incredibly gifted. And you really also, in some ways, it's a political book. You are really learning about these political ideas, the different ways to organize a society. Is communism really? It's not. Is communism so bad? But here's the things about the way that society was run that worked, and here is what was lost. And you don't just learn that in the abstract. You see it with her. You experience it, and so you come away from this book with something sort of a really kind of fresh understanding and insight into the kind of ideas and beliefs that govern our societies and how important they are. Feels very relevant, perhaps even more so now, increasingly. And finally, the economics side. She is an economist, and so she does weave that in a way that I'm always just a bit kind of tone deaf to those kinds of things. But even I found myself to be really interested. So again, it's one that I just know when my book club did it, we didn't have enough, couldn't have talked more about it. It was great.
Really?
We had so much to say. It's wonderful. It was shortlisted for the Baillie Gifford Nonfiction Prize, the Empire of Pain one, which is also incredibly strong. But I think if it hadn't been for that, I think this would have won. It's an extraordinary book and well worth a read, and such a wonderful one to discuss.
And your third one?
And sorry, I'll try and be a bit brief. I always get a bit carried away when I start talking about books. This is one that I thought perhaps people might not know or come across, left to their own devices. The other two I feel are, fairly well-known, prize-winning books. This one is perhaps a little bit more obscure, but it is such a wonderful, surprising read. It's called Kick the Latch by an American author called Catherine Scanlon. And she calls it fiction, but it's actually drawn from real life interviews that she conducted with this racehorse trainer in America. And it's the story of this racehorse trainer's life, Sonia. And she came from this very poor sort of hardscrabble background. In fact, her whole life was a struggle. And so, it's someone who's really lived, that kind of poor America, I suppose. I don't know how better to describe it. It's that section of society. It's the section where, things are not easy, and you really see that. There's something magical about the way that Scanlon recounts Sonia's stories, and it is so compelling I would not have said I had, beyond, my enjoyment of a Dick Francis novel, I had any interest in the world of horse racing.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, weirdly, it's kind of not about that, even though horse racing is the kind of the main thread of the whole story. That's the thing that, everything pivots around, her love of horses. But it's really much more. It's about a life, and it's about writing about a life, and how do you capture that life? And there is something in the way Scanlan does it that is so miraculous. And it's written in these very short fragments.
Oh my goodness.
That's
yes.
a chapter there.
Okay.
And so again, I think for book club, sometimes it's really nice just to actually tackle something that isn't super long.
Yeah.
Let people read it, let people have a bit of chance to reflect on it. And again, I just feel there's so much to kind of figure out about this, mainly to answer the question, why is this so good? Because it's not obvious, but it is.
No.
Trust me, it really is. And everyone who's read it knows,
Okay.
I have not heard a bad word from anyone who's read this, because people know this is like, oh yeah, kick the latch, it's amazing.
Okay. And
So
I
that's
think
my
that is a reiteration. It's not so much books that you think are fabulous, but it's books that lots of people think are fabulous, or lots of people want to talk about, which is why you mentioned at the beginning talking to booksellers and asking them what are the books that are being talked about, because that's what a book club needs. The conversation, to be part of a conversation that is bigger than you might think. I shall whiz through my 3
Yes, I was going to say
club choices. The first one is Edith Wharton, The Custom of the Country, which is about social climbing in the Gilded Age. And it's a straightforward, terrific novel about the climbing of Undine Spragg and how she raises herself from a no taste, new money to the highest possible levels of French aristocracy, even though she's from America. But there's a lot more in it about women's exposure and about different levels of class snobbishness, and it's just wonderful. It's a brilliant Wharton novel. And then there's a Handheld novel, Business as Usual, which is a terrific, it's one I discovered at a book sale when I nearly missed my stop on the train going home because it was so good. Novel written in letters, 1933, about a young woman getting a job in London for the first time, which she gets in a department store on Oxford Street, which is actually Selfridges, and she works in the book department. And it's all about, to my amazement, I hadn't really cottoned onto this. It's a thing that millennial women really are into, because it's about being in London in your 20s for the first time, finding your first job, finding your first place to live, making a life. And then there's the romance. And because it's all told through letters, you get a single woman's view, authentic 1930s voice, which is just after the Depression. There's quite a bit of social history in there too. And it's just so delightful, but at the same time, there are many, many darker layers that you can look for, because it's illustrated too. Look for if you want to. It's just utterly satisfying. And it's one of these books that we publish that people buy and then give it to their friends, or buy another copy for their mother-in-law.
I've read that one and I absolutely loved it. It's great.
And the last one is a historical novel, very like Matrix, but different. Nicola Griffith's novel Hild, which is about the imagined life of Hilda of Whitby in the 7th century in the east, northeast, and southeast of England. It is a stupendous work of historical reconstruction, and the sequel has just come out in the US. I don't think it's got a UK publisher yet, but it is absolutely outstanding as a work of reimagining what the 7th century might have been like, and the roles of women in Anglo-Saxon households, how politics works, how power works if you are a princess with no father and you're under the patronage of a king, and so on. It is just tremendous. It deserved every award it got.
I've got a copy of Hild, because after we did Matrix for the podcast, someone messaged me to tell me how great Hild was.
Yeah.
And so I did what I often do. I just sourced a secondhand copy.
Good.
So I have 2 questions.
Hey.
So the first one is there any non-fiction books that you've read and would recommend to the audience?
Non-fiction. You go first, Kate, while I think about this. What non-fiction have I read recently?
I'm a great nonfiction reader. I almost prefer nonfiction to fiction these days. I don't know whether that's just something that's happened as I get older, but what I do love as well is to mix it up. So if I've read, a couple of novels on the trot, I kind of almost crave nonfiction as a just palate cleanser. And sometimes I just want to know about real things. Increasingly as well, I really enjoy memoirs, people's own stories. I've got this book. Let me just grab it.
Well, a book that I finished last night, which I thought was terrific, was William Dalrymple's City of Jinns, a story of Delhi, a history of Delhi. And also, he lived there with his wife for a year. And this is about 10, 15 years ago. So it's a little out of date, but it's such a great narrative about what living in an Indian city is like if you're lodging with a Sikh family, hearing all about the terrible things that happened in partition, and also exploring old Delhi and working out the history of the city. I wasn't too sure when I began, but gosh, he's a good writer. So I really recommend that. William Dalrymple, City of Jinns, Djinns.
Picked up this book, which is called N Papers by Alexander Wolfe, which is a powerfully told story of family, honor, love, and truth by a masterful writer, blah, 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 blah. In N Papers, we see the Wolfe family through war and love, detention camps and immigration hearings, kindness and betrayal, occupying a world equal parts Casablanca and Kafka. It's engrossing and entertaining, a book of conscience and remembrance. It tells the beautiful truth that so often those who contribute most to the culture and civic life of a place are the outcast and the refugee. I just thought it's a story of the author's father and his grandfather. His grandfather was a publisher. And so I think for me, knowing that it's this sort of family history, but also with this connection to books and building a library and what that meant, I thought would be really interesting. I've got Glowing Still, which is travel writer Sarah Wheeler's
yes,
memoir. So this is drawing together all of the different sort of phases of her life that have been documented in her various books, almost all of which I've read and thoroughly enjoyed. I think I probably have read all Sarah Wheeler's books. My favorite being Terra Incognita, which is her wonderful travelogue of going to Antarctica. And I haven't got very far through this, but I am enjoying it. I keep picking it up. And I've got this one, which I just love so much, by a French author called Pierre Bayard. This is just brilliant. I love it so much. It's kind of become my Bible. It basically says, it's sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek, but at the same time, it's sort of not. He's building a case for how it's perfectly possible to talk about books if you haven't read them. And sometimes he argues, quite convincingly, it's actually better if you haven't read them. Like you could say more about them. Yes, so for the aspiring book clubber who's worrying about, maybe they haven't finished the book and is that going to be okay? It's fine. And if you dip into Pierre Bayard, he will tell you why.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And my second question that Kate Slotover was, how do the audience who are listening find out about your podcast, and where can they go to even follow you and things like that, and to learn more about it?
We are on all your podcast platforms, whether that's Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. If you just look for the Book Club Review, you will find us, and you will find 6 years worth of episodes covering book club books. We've done summer reading shows, we've done autumn reading shows, we've done prizes. We usually do the Booker Prize every year, so there's a show which we will read and talk about all 6 books and do our best to second guess the judges. We've done the Women's Prize as well for the last 2 years, which also is just really interesting, fantastic shortlist that's always worth looking into. We didn't talk, Kate, did we, about just prize shortlists?
No, we didn't.
A great way of keeping an eye on not just the winner, but what were the other books. By the time something gets to a prize shortlist, it's been through a lot of rounds of people having to decide it's good. So it's just helpful. It's kind of a shortcut for finding the good books.
Certainly is.
So without further ado, thank you, Kate Macdonald from Handheld Press, and thank you, Kate Slotover from the Book Club Review podcast. And thank you, audience, for listening.
Want to see more from us? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to click like, subscribe, or new content alert.